Look closely at the way most people live, and you will notice a quiet habit that shapes nearly everything they do. It is the habit of tightening their grip on life. Plans are made, expectations are built, and invisible rules are written about how the future should unfold. Success must look a certain way. Relationships must follow certain patterns. Opportunities must arrive at the right time. And if any piece of that imagined order begins to shift, anxiety quickly follows. The mind rushes to fix, adjust, calculate, and predict. Beneath all of this effort lies a single assumption: life must be controlled in order to be safe. Yet life has never promised such obedience. If you pause for a moment and examine your own experience, you may recognize how exhausting this invisible struggle can become. The mind wakes up already negotiating with the day ahead. It runs simulations of conversations that have not happened yet. It revisits mistakes that are already sealed in the past. And it constructs elaborate futures as if tomorrow were a puzzle that must be solved today. In doing so, the mind begins to carry a burden far heavier than it was designed to hold. This burden has a strange quality. The more intensely you carry it, the more fragile everything around you begins to feel. Plans become rigid. Expectations become fragile glass. Small disruptions appear larger than they truly are. Something as simple as an unexpected delay or a misunderstood word can feel like a threat to the structure you were trying so carefully to maintain. Control promises certainty, yet it quietly breeds tension. The deeper reason for this pattern is rarely discussed. Control is often a disguise for fear, not dramatic fear, but a quieter kind, the fear of uncertainty. The human mind naturally wants stability. It prefers predictable outcomes and familiar patterns. When uncertainty appears, the mind instinctively tries to eliminate it. It begins building systems of control, believing that if enough variables can be managed, the unknown will disappear. But uncertainty does not disappear. It simply waits. The truth is that life unfolds through countless forces that exist beyond any single person's ability to manage. Every event emerges from a network of choices, circumstances, and timing that stretches far beyond individual control. Weather shifts. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Other people make decisions you cannot predict. Entire directions in life sometimes change because of moments that seemed insignificant at the time. When you attempt to control everything, you are trying to organize an ocean using a small cup. At first, the effort may feel empowering. Planning gives the illusion of mastery. Predicting outcomes provides temporary comfort. But slowly, the effort turns against you. The mind begins to monitor everything constantly. It questions every possibility. It tries to foresee every consequence. Instead of creating freedom, control creates vigilance. Instead of peace, it produces mental noise. This is where the idea of surrender begins to appear. Often misunderstood and frequently resisted, many people react to the word surrender as if it implies weakness. They imagine a person who has stopped trying, someone who simply allows life to push them wherever it wishes. But real surrender has nothing to do with passivity. In fact, it is closer to clarity than defeat. Surrender is the moment you recognize that the struggle to dominate every outcome was never necessary in the first place. Consider how nature moves. Seasons change without argument. Rivers find their path without negotiation. Trees grow without demanding guarantees about tomorrow's weather. None of these processes require the constant mental effort that human beings often apply to their lives. They move according to deeper rhythms that do not depend on control. Human life contains those rhythms as well, though they are often buried beneath layers of expectation and fear. When you begin to loosen the demand that everything must unfold according to your preferred design, something subtle begins to shift. The mind becomes less crowded. Attention returns to the present moment rather than racing endlessly into the future. Decisions start emerging from observation instead of pressure. Surrender does not mean abandoning action. You still move, plan, create, and pursue what matters to you. The difference lies in the internal posture from which those actions arise. Instead of forcing outcomes, you participate in the process. Instead of gripping the future tightly, you allow its space to unfold. Many people discover an unexpected relief when they experiment with this perspective. Situations that once felt overwhelming become easier to navigate. Conversations become more genuine because they are no longer driven by hidden agendas. Opportunities become more visible because attention is no longer trapped inside rigid expectations. The world begins to feel less like a problem to be solved and more like a landscape to be explored. There is also a quiet courage involved in surrender. Letting go of excessive control requires trust, not blind faith, but a willingness to accept that life contains intelligence beyond personal planning. It is the recognition that every moment does not need to be engineered in order to have meaning. Sometimes the most important shifts in life occur precisely when the mind stops trying to force them. You may notice this in simple experiences. Ideas often appear when you stop overthinking. Solutions emerge after you step away from a problem. Encounters happen by coincidence that no careful strategy could have arranged. These moments reveal something subtle about the structure of life itself. Not everything arrives through effort alone. Gradually, the pressure to control every outcome begins to soften. The future becomes less of a battlefield and more of an unfolding path. You still move forward, but the movement feels lighter, less strained, less defensive. The mind becomes curious again instead of constantly guarded. Somewhere within that quiet shift, the burden you once carried begins to dissolve, leaving behind a different relationship with the flow of life. Resistance rarely announces itself loudly. It does not always appear as anger or visible struggle. More often it lives quietly inside the mind, hidden within expectations about how life should unfold. You may recognize it in small moments: the irritation when something takes longer than planned, the tension when a conversation does not go the way you imagined, the uneasiness when the future refuses to reveal its next step. In those moments, the mind subtly pushes against reality. It insists that events should move differently, that circumstances should rearrange themselves to match the picture already formed in thought. That push, that invisible opposition between what is happening and what you believe should be happening, is the essence of resistance. At first it feels harmless, even logical. The mind is trying to improve the situation, to guide life toward a preferred outcome. Yet something curious begins to happen when resistance becomes a constant habit. The more intensely you resist the present moment, the more powerful the tension inside you becomes. Instead of changing the situation, resistance often magnifies the discomfort surrounding it. A delayed plan becomes a source of frustration, a misunderstanding becomes a lingering conflict, an uncertain future becomes a cloud of worry that follows every thought. This happens because resistance locks your attention onto what you do not want. The mind begins replaying the same scenarios repeatedly, examining the problem from every possible angle, searching for a version of reality that feels more acceptable. But the present moment does not change simply because the mind argues with it. Reality remains exactly where it is, while your thoughts continue circling around it. When this pattern continues long enough, the mind slowly forgets something important. Life is not a rigid system that must obey every expectation you hold. It is a living process, constantly adjusting, expanding, and moving through countless interactions beyond your awareness. Every moment emerges from layers of cause and effect that stretch far beyond the horizon of your immediate perception. Trying to force that entire movement into a single preferred outcome is like trying to hold the wind still with your hands. This is where the practice of releasing resistance begins. It does not start with dramatic change. It begins with a simple shift in awareness. Instead of fighting the present moment, you begin by seeing it clearly. You acknowledge what is happening without immediately labeling it as right or wrong, success or failure. The mind relaxes its demand for instant resolution and allows the moment to exist as it is. This kind of acceptance can feel unfamiliar at first. The mind has spent years reacting quickly, judging quickly, and attempting to correct every deviation from its plans. When you pause that habit, even briefly, a surprising space appears. In that space, the emotional intensity surrounding a situation often begins to soften. What once seemed overwhelming starts to look more manageable, more fluid. Releasing resistance does not mean that you stop caring about the direction of your life. It means you stop wasting energy fighting what already exists. Once that struggle fades, the mind becomes clearer. And clarity changes how you respond to events. Imagine standing beside a flowing river again. When the water moves quickly, you could attempt to block it, redirect it, or argue with its direction. But the river will continue moving according to forces far larger than your effort. If you stop fighting the current and simply observe it, you begin to understand its rhythm. You see where the water speeds up, where it slows down, where it curves gently around obstacles. With that understanding, you can move with the current rather than against it. Life unfolds in a similar rhythm. Situations change, opportunities appear, challenges emerge, and relationships evolve. When resistance dominates your perspective, every change feels like a disruption. When resistance fades, those same changes begin to look like movements within a larger pattern. Trust plays an important role in this shift. Trust does not mean believing that every moment will be comfortable or easy. Life contains uncertainty, difficulty, and unexpected turns. Trust simply means recognizing that the unfolding of events often carries possibilities that cannot be seen in advance. Many of the most meaningful developments in a person's life begin as situations that seemed inconvenient, confusing, or even unwelcome at first. Think about how often clarity arrives after a period of uncertainty. A new direction appears only after an old one ends. A valuable lesson emerges from an experience that once seemed like failure. Opportunities often appear in places that were never part of the original plan. If life were perfectly controlled from the beginning, many of those discoveries would never occur. When resistance softens, you become more available to these possibilities. The mind is no longer occupied with correcting every detail of the present moment. Instead, it becomes attentive. It notices subtle changes, new connections, and unexpected openings. Actions become less reactive and more intentional because they are guided by awareness rather than by fear. Trusting the natural flow of life also changes the relationship you have with time. When resistance dominates your thinking, the mind constantly races ahead. It tries to solve tomorrow's problems today. It calculates outcomes that may never even appear. This habit pulls attention away from the only place where life is actually happening, the present moment. When resistance fades, attention returns to where your influence truly exists. Decisions are made with greater calm. Conversations become more genuine. Effort is directed toward what can actually be done, rather than toward imaginary scenarios that exist only in thought. Life begins to feel less like a sequence of obstacles and more like a continuous unfolding. There is something quietly powerful about this state. The world around you has not suddenly become perfect. Uncertainty still exists. Plans may still change, but your relationship with those changes becomes different. Instead of reacting immediately with tension, you begin to move with the unfolding moment, allowing life to reveal its next step at its own pace. In that quiet adjustment, the struggle that once filled your thoughts begins to lose its urgency, and the current of life continues moving exactly as it always has. There comes a subtle turning point in the inner life of a person when something long carried quietly begins to loosen its hold. Nothing dramatic happens on the outside. The world remains much the same. People continue their routines. Responsibilities remain in place, and the future still holds its usual uncertainties. Yet internally, something begins to shift. The constant tension that once accompanied every expectation, every plan, and every outcome starts to fade. This shift is often the first real taste of detachment. Detachment is frequently misunderstood because the word itself sounds cold or distant. Some imagine that it means withdrawing from life, losing interest, or refusing to care. But true detachment has nothing to do with indifference. In reality, it brings a deeper engagement with life, not less. The difference lies in how you hold your desires, your experiences, and your expectations. Instead of gripping them tightly, as if they must behave exactly as imagined, you begin to allow them space to unfold. Most of the emotional weight people carry comes from attachment to specific outcomes. The mind constructs a picture of how things should be, the career that must succeed, the relationship that must remain unchanged, the future that must arrive according to a certain timeline. Once that picture forms, every deviation from it feels like a threat. Even small changes create waves of anxiety, disappointment, or frustration. Life becomes a constant effort to defend an imagined version of reality. Detachment dissolves that tension by loosening the grip of expectation. It allows you to move toward your goals and desires without chaining your emotional well-being to the exact way they must appear. You still care about the direction of your life. You still pursue what matters to you, but your peace is no longer held hostage by outcomes that may take unexpected paths. This shift creates a surprising sense of freedom. When attachment dominates the mind, every situation becomes loaded with hidden pressure. Conversations carry the weight of unspoken expectations. Efforts toward success become heavy with fear of failure. Even moments of rest can feel uneasy because the mind is already worrying about what must happen next. Attachment quietly turns life into a series of tests. Detachment removes that invisible burden. When you are no longer insisting that every outcome confirm your expectations, the mind begins to relax. You become able to act with focus and intention without the exhausting tension that comes from trying to control every result. Decisions become clearer because they are not clouded by the fear of losing something you feel you must possess. One of the most immediate effects of detachment is peace. This peace does not come from external conditions suddenly becoming perfect. Life still contains change, challenge, and unpredictability. The peace arises from a shift in how those experiences are held internally. Instead of resisting every difficulty or clinging to every pleasure, the mind allows experiences to move through it without becoming trapped by them. Imagine holding sand in your hand. If you close your fist tightly, the sand slips through your fingers more quickly. The harder you squeeze, the less you actually keep. But if your hand remains open, the sand rests naturally in your palm. Detachment works in a similar way. When you release the need to possess every outcome, life often begins to flow more smoothly through your experience. This does not mean that everything suddenly becomes effortless or that desires automatically appear the moment you release attachment. What changes is the quality of your engagement with life. Instead of approaching every situation with tension, you meet it with openness. Instead of fearing loss at every step, you recognize that change is a natural part of existence. Liberation grows from this understanding. Much of human suffering comes from the belief that happiness depends entirely on external events. If a certain goal is achieved, happiness will appear. If a certain problem disappears, peace will arrive. If circumstances remain favorable, then life will feel secure. This way of thinking places emotional freedom outside your control, tied to conditions that constantly shift. Detachment reverses that pattern. It reminds you that your inner state does not have to mirror every movement of the external world. Success can be pursued without desperation. Failure can be experienced without losing your sense of worth. Pleasure can be enjoyed without fearing its eventual end. When attachment loosens, emotional stability begins to grow. This stability creates a new kind of strength. Instead of reacting impulsively to every change, you gain the ability to respond thoughtfully. Situations that once felt overwhelming become easier to navigate because your sense of identity is no longer entangled with every temporary outcome. You begin to see events as experiences rather than as definitions of who you are. Detachment also opens space for gratitude. When the mind is trapped in attachment, it constantly measures reality against expectation. It focuses on what is missing, what is delayed, what has not yet appeared. This habit obscures the richness that already exists in the present moment. But when attachment softens, attention naturally begins to notice what is already here, the small moments of clarity, the unexpected kindness of others, the quiet opportunities that might have gone unseen before. Over time, this shift changes the entire emotional atmosphere of your life. The pressure to control every detail gradually dissolves. You continue to set goals and pursue meaningful work, but the journey becomes lighter. Instead of carrying the heavy weight of constant expectation, you move forward with a sense of curiosity and openness. Peace, freedom, and liberation do not arrive as distant rewards waiting somewhere in the future. They emerge gradually as attachment loosens its hold on the mind. Life continues to move. Circumstances continue to change, and new experiences continue to appear. Yet within that movement, the quiet stability of detachment remains present, steady and unhurried, a mind that is constantly pulled by fear, expectation, and emotional turbulence cannot see clearly. It reacts quickly, judges prematurely, and often mistakes impulse for insight. Many of the decisions people regret later were not made because they lacked intelligence or experience. They were made because the mind was clouded at the moment when clarity was needed most. This is where rational thinking begins to reveal its quiet importance. It acts as a stabilizing force, allowing you to step back from emotional noise and examine situations with calm observation rather than instinctive reaction. Rational thinking is not cold or mechanical, as it is sometimes portrayed. In its truest form, it is a discipline of awareness. It asks the mind to pause before reaching conclusions. It invites you to examine information carefully, to separate evidence from assumption, and to recognize how easily emotions can distort perception. When you practice rational thinking, you are not suppressing your feelings. Instead, you are preventing them from dominating every judgment you make. Consider how often the mind leaps to conclusions based on incomplete information. A delayed response from someone becomes a sign of rejection. A temporary obstacle becomes evidence that success is impossible. A single failure becomes proof that you are incapable. These conclusions arise quickly because the emotional brain prefers immediate interpretation over patient analysis. Rational thinking interrupts that pattern. It asks a simple but powerful question: what are the actual facts here? When you learn to ask that question consistently, something interesting happens. Many situations that once felt overwhelming begin to appear less dramatic. Problems become more defined, more manageable, and sometimes even smaller than they first appeared. The mind begins to see structure where it once saw chaos. Instead of reacting impulsively, you start analyzing the situation piece by piece. This ability to break down complex situations is one of the greatest strengths of rational thinking. Life often presents challenges that appear tangled and confusing at first glance. Emotional thinking tends to amplify that confusion, blending different concerns into one overwhelming feeling. Rational thinking takes a different approach. It separates the issue into smaller components, examines each one individually, and gradually reconstructs a clearer picture of what is actually happening. In doing so, rational thinking also exposes the hidden influence of cognitive biases. These biases are subtle mental shortcuts that shape perception without you noticing. One common example is confirmation bias, the tendency to search for information that supports what you already believe while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. Another is availability bias, where the mind assumes that the most recent or emotionally vivid events represent the most likely outcomes. There is also anchoring bias, where the first piece of information you encounter becomes the reference point for all future judgments, even if it is inaccurate. These biases operate quietly in the background of everyday thinking. They influence how people interpret news, evaluate opportunities, and judge others. Without awareness of them, decisions can easily drift away from reality. Rational thinking acts like a lens that reveals these distortions. By recognizing them, you gain the ability to question your own assumptions before they shape your choices. Developing rational thinking requires more than simply gathering information. It also involves cultivating intellectual humility, the willingness to admit that your first interpretation might be incomplete. This humility opens the door to deeper understanding. Instead of defending your initial beliefs at all costs, you become curious about alternative explanations. You explore multiple viewpoints, compare evidence, and adjust your conclusions when new information appears. Communication also improves when rational thinking becomes a habit. Conversations often break down when emotions dominate the exchange. People speak defensively, listen selectively, and interpret disagreement as personal attack. When reasoning and evidence guide the conversation, a different dynamic emerges. Discussions become opportunities to explore ideas rather than battles to win arguments. Clarity replaces misunderstanding, and dialogue becomes more productive. Another important aspect of rational decision-making is the evaluation of consequences. Every choice carries potential outcomes, both positive and negative. Emotional thinking tends to focus on immediate relief or immediate gratification. Rational thinking extends the timeline. It asks what might happen next week, next month, or next year as a result of this decision. By examining potential consequences carefully, you gain a broader perspective on the path you are choosing. Clear goals also strengthen rational thinking. When your objectives are vague, decisions become scattered and inconsistent. The mind drifts from one impulse to another because there is no clear direction guiding its choices. But when goals are well defined, each decision can be measured against them. You begin to ask whether a particular action moves you closer to what truly matters or pulls you away from it. Even mistakes become valuable within this framework. Rational thinking does not interpret failure as personal defeat. Instead, it treats it as information. Every unsuccessful outcome contains clues about what can be improved. By examining those experiences without excessive self-judgment, you transform setbacks into learning opportunities. Over time, this process strengthens both judgment and resilience. The discipline of rational thinking does not eliminate uncertainty from life. No amount of analysis can guarantee that every decision will lead to the desired result. However, it dramatically increases the likelihood that your choices are grounded in reality rather than reaction. It allows you to navigate complexity with patience instead of panic. As this clarity develops, decisions begin to feel less chaotic. The mind becomes steadier, less prone to sudden swings of optimism or despair. Situations that once triggered confusion now invite careful observation. Gradually, rational thinking becomes less of a deliberate effort and more of a natural way of approaching the world. And within that steady clarity, decisions begin to take shape with a quiet sense of direction. Not every mistake in life comes from a lack of intelligence. In fact, some of the most misguided decisions people make occur not because they do not know enough, but because their perception has quietly been distorted. The human mind is remarkably capable, yet it carries a subtle vulnerability. It does not always see reality as it is. Instead, it often sees reality through filters, emotions, past experiences, fears, expectations, and unconscious biases that shape the way information is interpreted. These invisible filters can guide judgment in ways that feel completely convincing, even when they are misleading. Bias is rarely obvious while it is operating. It feels natural, even logical, because it confirms what the mind already believes. When you expect something to go wrong, the mind begins searching for evidence that supports that expectation. When you form an early opinion about a person or situation, new information tends to be interpreted through that first impression. Without realizing it, the mind begins building a narrative that reinforces its existing perspective. Over time, this narrative can grow so familiar that it feels indistinguishable from truth. Emotion amplifies this process. Feelings such as fear, anger, excitement, or disappointment can quickly narrow the field of perception. Under strong emotional influence, the mind moves faster than usual, reaching conclusions before all the relevant information has been considered. A moment of frustration may lead to harsh judgment. A surge of enthusiasm may cause risks to appear smaller than they truly are. Emotional reactions often demand immediate interpretation, and when the mind complies too quickly, judgment becomes less reliable. To overcome this pattern, awareness becomes the first essential step. You begin by recognizing that your thoughts are not always neutral observations of reality. They are interpretations shaped by countless influences, memories, beliefs, cultural conditioning, and emotional states. Simply acknowledging this fact creates a small but powerful distance between your thoughts and your identity. Instead of automatically believing every interpretation that appears in your mind, you begin to observe it. This shift from automatic belief to conscious observation changes how judgment unfolds. When a strong reaction arises, you pause long enough to examine it. You ask what evidence truly supports the conclusion your mind is forming. You consider whether the situation might have alternative explanations. Often, the first interpretation turns out to be only one possibility among many. Consider how easily assumptions can form in everyday situations. Someone speaks in a short or distracted tone, and the mind concludes that they are upset or dismissive. A project encounters unexpected difficulty, and the mind interprets it as a sign that the entire effort is doomed. A piece of criticism appears, and the mind assumes that personal worth is being questioned. These interpretations happen quickly because the brain prefers efficiency. It wants to categorize experiences as rapidly as possible. But speed does not always produce accuracy. Rational awareness slows this process down just enough to allow clarity to enter. Instead of reacting immediately, you give the situation space to reveal more information. The short tone in someone's voice might come from fatigue rather than irritation. The challenge in a project might reveal an adjustment that improves the outcome. The criticism might contain useful insight rather than rejection. When bias loosens its grip, possibilities expand. Learning to manage emotional influence also plays a critical role in clear judgment. Emotions themselves are not enemies of rational thought. They provide valuable signals about what matters to you and how situations affect your well-being. The difficulty arises when emotions become the sole authority guiding decisions. In those moments, judgment becomes reactive rather than thoughtful. One of the most effective ways to regain balance is to introduce a brief pause between emotion and response. Techniques such as deep breathing, mindful observation, or stepping away from a situation temporarily can create that pause. When the immediate emotional intensity begins to settle, the mind regains its ability to evaluate information more calmly. This small interval between stimulus and reaction often determines whether a decision becomes impulsive or thoughtful. Another valuable practice involves actively seeking perspectives that challenge your current assumptions. The mind naturally gravitates toward information that confirms its existing beliefs, but genuine clarity often emerges when those beliefs are questioned. Listening to alternative viewpoints, examining unfamiliar evidence, or reconsidering long-held opinions can reveal insights that would otherwise remain hidden. While this process may feel uncomfortable at times, it strengthens intellectual integrity and sharpens judgment. In complex situations, gathering reliable information becomes equally important. Not all sources of information carry equal credibility. Rumors, partial reports, and emotionally charged narratives can easily distort perception. Rational thinking encourages careful evaluation of evidence, checking sources, examining context, and distinguishing between verified facts and speculation. This discipline helps ensure that decisions rest on a stable foundation rather than on uncertain assumptions. When this habit develops, your relationship with mistakes also changes. Instead of viewing errors as signs of personal inadequacy, you begin to see them as opportunities to refine your understanding. Every incorrect judgment reveals something about the biases or assumptions that influenced it. By examining these patterns openly, you gradually train the mind to recognize them earlier in future situations. Over time, judgment becomes more balanced and resilient. The ability to overcome bias and emotional distortion does not make life perfectly predictable. Uncertainty remains a natural part of the human experience. However, it significantly reduces the confusion that arises when perception is clouded by unchecked assumptions. Decisions become more deliberate, responses more measured, and interactions with others more thoughtful. Gradually, the mind develops a different rhythm. Instead of racing toward conclusions, it observes first. Instead of defending assumptions, it examines them. And within that steady practice of awareness, judgment begins to move with greater clarity, less distortion, and a quieter sense of understanding. Every direction in life begins with a decision about where you want to go. Without that sense of direction, the mind drifts easily from one impulse to another, responding to circumstances rather than shaping them. Goals give structure to effort. They create a reference point that allows you to measure your actions and evaluate whether they move you closer to the life you intend to build. Yet goals, like many powerful tools, can either clarify your path or quietly complicate it, depending on how they are held in the mind. Many people approach goals with a mixture of excitement and pressure. The moment a goal is defined, the mind begins imagining the future attached to it. Success becomes vivid and motivating. But alongside that vision often comes a hidden tension the belief that the goal must be achieved exactly as imagined. When that belief takes hold, the journey toward the goal becomes rigid. Every obstacle feels like a threat, every delay feels like failure, and every unexpected turn feels like evidence that something is going wrong. In reality, goals function best as guides rather than as strict commands imposed on the future. They provide direction, but they cannot dictate every detail of the path ahead. Life is dynamic, shaped by circumstances that constantly evolve. New information appears, opportunities shift, and priorities sometimes change. When goals are treated as flexible markers rather than fixed destinies, they remain powerful without becoming oppressive. Clear goals serve another essential function. They sharpen decision-making. When your objectives are well defined, choices become easier to evaluate. Each opportunity can be examined through a simple question: does this move me closer to what I truly want? Or does it pull me away from it? This clarity prevents energy from scattering across too many directions at once. It allows effort to become focused, deliberate, and purposeful. However, defining a goal is only the beginning. Every decision made along the path toward that goal carries consequences. Some consequences are immediate and visible. Others unfold slowly over time. Rational thinking encourages you to look beyond the immediate appeal of a decision and consider the broader landscape it creates. A choice that feels satisfying in the moment may carry long-term complications, while a more difficult decision today may open opportunities that only become visible later. Understanding consequences requires patience and reflection. The mind must step outside the urgency of the present moment and examine how actions ripple outward into the future. This process involves imagining possible outcomes, evaluating potential risks, and weighing the advantages and disadvantages of different choices. When practiced consistently, it strengthens the ability to act with foresight rather than impulse. Yet even the most thoughtful planning cannot eliminate the possibility of failure. Failure is an inevitable companion to meaningful effort. Any person who attempts something challenging will eventually encounter setbacks. Projects may stall, strategies may prove ineffective, and goals may need to be reconsidered. The presence of failure does not indicate weakness. It simply reflects the complexity of navigating a world where certainty rarely exists. What determines the value of failure is how it is interpreted. Many people view failure as a personal verdict. When something does not succeed, they conclude that the effort itself was misguided or that their abilities are insufficient. This interpretation often leads to discouragement and withdrawal. Instead of learning from the experience, the mind retreats from future attempts in order to avoid repeating the discomfort. A more constructive perspective treats failure as information rather than judgment. Every unsuccessful outcome carries lessons about what did not work, why it did not work, and what might be adjusted in the future. When examined calmly, failure becomes a form of feedback. It reveals weaknesses in strategy, gaps in preparation, or assumptions that were inaccurate. Each insight gained through this process refines your understanding of the path forward. This approach requires a shift in mindset. Instead of fearing mistakes, you begin to view them as part of the learning process. Progress rarely occurs through perfect execution from the beginning. It develops through cycles of action, evaluation, and adjustment. Each attempt adds experience. Each misstep adds perspective. Over time, these accumulated insights create a deeper form of competence than success alone could provide. Reflection plays a crucial role in transforming failure into learning. After any significant outcome, successful or not, it is valuable to pause and review the sequence of events that led there. What assumptions influenced the decision? What information was overlooked? What unexpected factors appeared along the way? By exploring these questions honestly, you begin to identify patterns that shape your results. This reflective practice also strengthens resilience. When failure is understood as part of the process rather than as a final judgment, the emotional weight surrounding it becomes lighter. Setbacks still carry disappointment, but they no longer erase the value of the effort itself. Instead, they become temporary stages in a larger progression of growth. Over time, the relationship between goals and failure begins to evolve. Goals remain important because they provide direction and motivation. Consequences remain important because they remind you that choices shape the future. Failure remains present because exploration always involves uncertainty. But none of these elements dominate the experience of life in isolation. They become interconnected parts of a larger journey. Within that journey, clarity gradually replaces confusion, decisions grow more thoughtful, expectations more balanced, and responses to setbacks more measured. Progress no longer depends on avoiding mistakes entirely, but on learning from them with patience and awareness. And through that steady process of adjustment and understanding, the path forward continues to take shape, one decision at a time. Human life is shaped not only by the goals you pursue or the thoughts you cultivate, but also by the relationships you build along the way. Every meaningful experience, friendship, partnership, family, collaboration unfolds within the invisible space between people. And yet, relationships often become one of the most complicated areas of life, not because connection itself is difficult, but because the expectations, fears, and assumptions carried into relationships can quietly distort the way people relate to one another. Many relationships begin with enthusiasm and openness. There is curiosity about the other person, a willingness to listen, and a genuine interest in understanding who they are. But as time passes, subtle shifts often occur. Expectations form. Assumptions about behavior begin to grow. The mind starts predicting how the other person should act, how they should respond, and how the relationship should evolve. When those expectations are not fulfilled exactly as imagined, tension begins to appear. This tension rarely emerges suddenly. It builds slowly through small misunderstandings, unspoken disappointments, or the feeling that something important is not being acknowledged. Instead of openly addressing these experiences, people often retreat into silent interpretation. The mind fills the gaps in communication with its own narratives. A delayed message becomes a sign of neglect. A distracted moment becomes evidence of disinterest. Gradually, perception drifts away from the actual behavior of the other person and moves toward imagined conclusions. Healthy relationships begin to take shape when this pattern is recognized and interrupted. Trust becomes the first essential element. Trust does not mean believing that another person will always behave perfectly or never make mistakes. No human relationship can sustain that expectation. Trust means allowing space for imperfection without immediately assuming the worst. It means recognizing that misunderstandings can occur without hidden motives, and that communication often requires patience to unfold fully. Trust grows through consistency and openness. When people demonstrate reliability in their actions and honesty in their communication, the foundation of the relationship becomes stronger. Small gestures of consideration, attentive listening, and genuine presence gradually build a sense of security between individuals. Over time, these repeated experiences create confidence that the relationship can endure moments of difficulty without collapsing into suspicion or resentment. Presence is equally important. In a world filled with distractions, true attention has become rare. Many conversations occur while minds are partially elsewhere, thinking about tasks, scrolling through devices, or preparing responses before the other person has finished speaking. When attention is divided, connection weakens. Words may be exchanged, but understanding remains shallow. Presence restores depth to interaction. When you listen fully to another person without rushing to interpret or respond, the quality of the conversation changes. You begin to notice the tone behind their words, the emotions beneath their expressions, and the subtle meaning that might otherwise go unnoticed. This attentive awareness allows communication to move beyond surface-level exchanges and into genuine understanding. Active listening plays a central role in this process. Instead of approaching conversation as an opportunity to defend your own viewpoint, you treat it as an opportunity to explore the other person's perspective. Questions become invitations rather than challenges. Clarification replaces assumption. In this atmosphere, people feel seen and valued rather than judged or corrected. Empathy naturally develops within this environment of presence. Empathy does not require you to agree with every opinion or decision another person makes. It simply asks you to acknowledge that their experiences, feelings, and interpretations arise from their own unique perspective. When empathy guides interaction, Disagreements become less threatening because they are no longer interpreted as personal attacks. Healthy relationships also require shared experiences that strengthen the bond between individuals. Time spent together in meaningful activities, whether through conversation, collaboration, or simple companionship, creates memories that reinforce connection. These shared moments become reference points that remind both individuals of the value the relationship holds. Without this intentional investment of time and attention, even strong relationships can slowly drift into distance. Equally important is the willingness to respect personal individuality. A relationship flourishes when both individuals maintain their own sense of identity rather than dissolving entirely into the expectations of the other. Personal interests, independent goals, and individual reflection provide balance within connection. When each person retains their own inner stability, the relationship becomes a meeting of two whole individuals rather than a fragile system dependent on constant validation. Balance between connection and independence prevents relationships from sliding into dependency. When one person's emotional well-being depends entirely on the behavior or approval of another, the relationship becomes unstable. Small conflicts begin to carry exaggerated emotional weight, and ordinary misunderstandings may escalate unnecessarily. Emotional independence allows each person to maintain internal stability while still caring deeply about the connection they share. Communication, trust, presence, and independence together create the foundation of a healthy relationship. None of these elements appear instantly. They develop gradually through repeated interactions, shared experiences, and the willingness to approach each other with patience rather than immediate judgment. Over time, this foundation allows the relationship to endure challenges that would otherwise weaken it. Every relationship inevitably encounters moments of uncertainty. Miscommunication may occur. Expectations may need adjustment. External pressures may influence the dynamic between individuals. Yet when trust and presence remain active within the relationship, these moments do not necessarily become points of fracture. Instead, they become opportunities to deepen understanding and strengthen connection. In this way, relationships become less about controlling another person's behavior and more about cultivating an environment where mutual respect and awareness can grow. Connection unfolds through attention rather than assumption, through openness rather than defensiveness. And within that space of shared presence, the quiet architecture of a healthy relationship continues to take shape over time. One of the quiet tensions that shapes many relationships is not something people openly discuss. It lives beneath conversations, beneath gestures, and beneath even the most caring intentions. That tension is expectation. Expectations often begin harmlessly. When you care about someone, it is natural to imagine how they might respond to certain situations. You picture how support should appear, how appreciation should be expressed, how loyalty should be demonstrated. In the beginning, these mental images feel comforting. They provide a sense of structure to the relationship, but slowly, often without your awareness, those expectations begin to solidify into silent rules. The difficulty is that the other person rarely knows those rules exist. Once expectations become fixed, the mind starts measuring reality against them. If someone behaves in a way that matches your expectation, the relationship feels smooth and affirming. But if their behavior differs even slightly, the mind begins to react. Disappointment appears. Frustration follows. Sometimes resentment quietly forms, even though no agreement was ever made in the first place. What began as an imagined preference gradually becomes an emotional demand. This pattern is common because expectations give the mind an illusion of certainty. They allow you to predict how the relationship should unfold and how the other person should behave within it. Yet people are not fixed systems. Every individual carries their own history, emotional rhythms, priorities, and ways of expressing care. Expecting another person to behave exactly according to your internal script creates tension, not because either person is wrong, but because reality rarely conforms perfectly to private assumptions. Releasing expectations does not mean lowering standards or accepting unhealthy behavior. It means recognizing the difference between appreciation and control. Appreciation allows another person to show up as they are, while control attempts to reshape them into a version that matches your imagined ideal. When expectations soften, relationships begin to breathe again. Instead of constantly measuring what is missing, you become more capable of noticing what is genuinely present. Acceptance plays a central role in this shift. Acceptance does not require you to ignore problems or avoid necessary conversations. Rather, it begins with acknowledging the other person's individuality. They have their own thoughts, reactions, and limitations, just as you do. When you allow this reality to exist without immediate judgment, communication becomes more honest. Conversations no longer carry the hidden weight of trying to force someone into a particular role. As expectations loosen, another important quality begins to emerge: emotional independence. Many people enter relationships with the unconscious belief that another person must provide their sense of happiness, security, or worth. When that belief takes hold, the relationship becomes fragile. Every action from the other person suddenly carries enormous emotional significance. A small misunderstanding can feel devastating because it threatens the stability of your internal state. Emotional independence changes this dynamic. It begins with recognizing that your emotional well-being is ultimately your own responsibility. Other people can bring joy, companionship, and support into your life, but they cannot serve as the sole foundation of your inner stability. When your sense of worth depends entirely on external approval, relationships easily slide into patterns of dependency. Developing emotional independence requires strengthening your connection with yourself. This involves cultivating interests, passion, and personal growth that exist independently of the relationship. When your life contains sources of meaning beyond a single connection, you approach relationships with greater balance. You appreciate the presence of the other person, but your emotional state does not collapse when they are temporarily unavailable or imperfect. This independence also creates a healthier environment for both individuals. When two people meet each other as emotionally grounded individuals rather than as sources of validation, the relationship becomes lighter and more authentic. Conversations are no longer dominated by hidden needs for reassurance. Instead, they become opportunities to share experiences, ideas, and genuine connection. Another benefit of emotional independence is the reduction of fear within relationships. Attachment to expectations often produces anxiety about loss. The mind begins worrying about whether the relationship will continue to meet every emotional need. But when your inner stability does not depend entirely on another person, that fear loses much of its intensity. You are free to care deeply without constantly guarding against the possibility of disappointment. This freedom encourages honesty. When expectations and emotional dependence dominate a relationship, people often hide their true thoughts in order to avoid conflict or preserve approval. Emotional independence allows for more open communication. You can express concerns or differences without feeling that the entire relationship is at risk. Disagreements become manageable discussions rather than emotional crises. Balance is essential in this process. Emotional independence does not mean emotional distance. It does not mean withdrawing affection or avoiding vulnerability. Healthy relationships still require warmth, empathy, and mutual care. The difference is that these qualities arise from genuine connection rather than from the pressure of fulfilling unspoken emotional demands. Over time, this balance creates a relationship that feels both supportive and spacious. Each person retains their individuality while still sharing meaningful experiences together. Expectations no longer dominate the interaction. Instead, appreciation grows for the unique ways each person contributes to the relationship. The connection becomes less about fulfilling roles and more about discovering who the other person truly is. In this atmosphere, relationships become more resilient. Changes in circumstance, moments of misunderstanding, or temporary emotional distance no longer threaten the entire structure of the bond. Because both individuals maintain their own internal grounding, the relationship has room to adapt and evolve. It becomes a dynamic exchange rather than a rigid set of expectations. When expectations loosen and emotional independence develops, relationships begin to move with a quieter rhythm. The need to control how another person should behave fades into the background. In its place remains something simpler: two individuals sharing space, attention, and experience without the constant pressure of living up to imagined standards. There are moments in life when everything seems to move too quickly. Plans collapse without warning. Emotions rise without explanation, and the mind begins searching desperately for something stable to hold on to. During such times, people often believe that peace will only return once the situation is solved. They imagine that calm exists somewhere in the future, waiting for the problem to disappear. Yet the deeper truth is that peace rarely arrives from the outside. It emerges from the way the mind meets the moment that is already here. When turmoil appears, the mind usually reacts by trying to escape the discomfort. It revisits the past, replaying events and wondering what should have been done differently, or it rushes into the future, imagining scenarios that might never happen. In doing so, attention drifts away from the present moment, the only place where clarity and stability can actually exist. This is where mindfulness begins to reveal its quiet strength. Mindfulness is often described as the practice of paying full attention to the present moment without judgment. At first glance, this idea may seem almost too simple to matter. After all, people assume they are already aware of what is happening around them. But in reality, much of daily life is experienced through layers of distraction. The body may be present, yet the mind is busy analyzing the past or anticipating the future. Mindfulness gently interrupts this habit. It invites the mind to return to direct experience rather than to endless interpretation. Imagine sitting quietly and noticing your breath for a few moments. The breath moves in and out naturally, without needing to be forced or controlled. As you observe it, thoughts continue to appear, but you do not chase them. You simply acknowledge them and allow them to pass. In that brief interval, the mind steps out of its usual cycle of reaction. The moment becomes clearer, calmer, and more spacious. This is the foundation of mindfulness, learning to observe experience rather than immediately resisting it. Acceptance naturally grows from this awareness. Acceptance is often misunderstood as resignation, as if acknowledging reality means agreeing with every situation that arises. But acceptance is not approval. It is simply the recognition that what is happening right now already exists. Fighting against that fact does not change it. Resistance only multiplies the mental suffering surrounding the situation. When acceptance appears, the mind stops arguing with reality and begins to see it more clearly. Consider how often distress intensifies because of resistance. A difficult conversation becomes more painful when you replay it repeatedly in your thoughts. A mistake grows heavier when the mind insists that it should never have happened. Even small inconveniences can expand into large frustrations when the mind refuses to accept them. Acceptance does not erase the difficulty, but it prevents the mind from turning a temporary challenge into a prolonged internal struggle. Once acceptance settles in, something unexpected often happens. The mind regains its ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally. When you stop resisting what already exists, you free the mental energy that was previously consumed by frustration. That energy can now be directed toward understanding the situation and choosing the most constructive path forward. Mindfulness also reveals how much of suffering is tied to attachment to the past. Many people carry regrets that replay endlessly in their thoughts. They revisit missed opportunities, words they wish they had spoken differently, or decisions that led to disappointing outcomes. These reflections often appear under the belief that reviewing the past will somehow change it, but the past remains unchanged no matter how often the mind returns to it. What changes instead is the present moment, which becomes overshadowed by memories that can no longer be altered. Letting go of regret requires self-compassion. Every person makes mistakes, misunderstands situations, and occasionally chooses paths that later prove unhelpful. These experiences are not evidence of personal failure but part of the learning process that shapes growth. When you view the past through this lens, it becomes a source of understanding rather than a permanent burden. Acceptance also extends to circumstances beyond your control. Life inevitably presents situations that cannot be immediately changed: unexpected losses, external pressures, or conditions that require patience before resolution becomes possible. When the mind insists that such circumstances should not exist, frustration intensifies. Acceptance does not remove the challenge, but it transforms the relationship you have with it. Instead of resisting the situation, you begin exploring how to move through it with resilience. Uncertainty often accompanies these moments of turmoil. The future appears unclear, and the mind naturally seeks reassurance about what will happen next. Mindfulness offers a different perspective. Rather than demanding certainty about the entire future, it brings attention back to the next step available in the present moment. One clear step, taken calmly, often reveals the next one. In this way, progress unfolds gradually rather than through complete control. Practices such as meditation, slow breathing, or simply pausing during stressful moments can reinforce this awareness. These small acts remind the mind that peace is not something that must be chased across time. It can be rediscovered in the stillness of the present moment. Even when circumstances remain unsettled, over time, mindfulness becomes less of a deliberate exercise and more of a way of relating to life. Situations that once triggered immediate anxiety begin to unfold within a broader sense of awareness. Emotions still arise, but they pass more easily because they are no longer resisted with the same intensity. The mind learns to remain steady even while events continue to change. Peace, in this sense, is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of clarity within it. And as the mind becomes familiar with this clarity, moments of turmoil begin to feel less overwhelming, leaving space for quiet understanding to take their place. If there is one condition that quietly shapes every human life, it is uncertainty. No matter how carefully plans are arranged, no matter how much knowledge or experience a person gathers, the future never reveals itself completely in advance. And yet the human mind has a deep desire for predictability. It prefers maps to open landscapes, guarantees to possibilities, and clear answers to unanswered questions. Because of this tendency, uncertainty is often interpreted as something dangerous, something that must be avoided or controlled as quickly as possible. But uncertainty is not simply an obstacle placed in the path of life. In many ways, it is the very condition that allows growth to occur. Think about the moments in life when the greatest changes happened. Rarely did they arrive with complete clarity beforehand. A new opportunity appeared unexpectedly. A decision had to be made without knowing every possible outcome. A direction was chosen based on intuition, courage, or curiosity rather than certainty. At the time, these moments may have felt uncomfortable, even unsettling, yet they often became the turning points that shaped the course of a life. The difficulty lies in how the mind responds to the unknown. When uncertainty appears, the mind instinctively tries to fill the empty space with predictions. It imagines scenarios, calculates risks, and searches for any information that might restore a sense of control. Sometimes this process is helpful. Careful planning and thoughtful preparation can prevent unnecessary mistakes. But when the mind becomes obsessed with eliminating every unknown variable, it begins to move in circles. It searches endlessly for answers that do not yet exist. This is where anxiety begins to grow. The mind keeps asking questions the present moment cannot answer. What if things go wrong? What if the decision leads to failure? What if the future turns out differently than expected? These questions multiply until uncertainty itself feels overwhelming. Instead of seeing the unknown as space where new possibilities may appear, the mind interprets it as a threat. Embracing uncertainty begins with recognizing that the unknown is not an error in the structure of life. It is part of its design. If the entire future were visible in advance, many of the qualities that give life meaning would disappear. Curiosity would vanish because nothing would remain to discover. Courage would lose its significance because no risk would exist. Growth would become unnecessary because every outcome would already be predetermined. Uncertainty creates the environment where learning, adaptation, and creativity become possible. When you begin to accept this idea, your relationship with the unknown starts to change. Instead of seeing uncertainty as a barrier that must be removed, you start to see it as a field of potential. Each uncertain situation becomes an invitation to explore rather than a problem that demands immediate resolution. This shift does not eliminate discomfort entirely, but it transforms the meaning behind that discomfort. One of the most powerful responses to uncertainty is curiosity. Curiosity allows the mind to approach unfamiliar situations with openness rather than fear. Instead of asking only how to avoid mistakes, Curiosity asks what can be learned from the experience. It invites experimentation, observation, and discovery. Through curiosity, uncertainty becomes a teacher rather than an adversary. Another essential quality in navigating uncertainty is adaptability. Life rarely follows a perfectly straight path. Plans evolve, circumstances change, and new information appears along the way. Adaptability allows you to adjust your approach without losing sight of your deeper intentions. Rather than clinging rigidly to one specific outcome, you remain responsive to the unfolding situation. This flexibility often reveals opportunities that would have remained invisible if you insisted on following a single predetermined route. Adaptability also requires letting go of the belief that every step must be perfect. Many people hesitate to move forward because they fear making the wrong decision. They wait for the moment when certainty arrives before taking action. But that moment rarely comes. Growth usually begins when you move forward with incomplete information, guided by the best understanding available at the time. In this way, uncertainty becomes closely connected with courage. Courage does not mean acting without fear. It means choosing to move forward even when the outcome cannot be guaranteed. Each step taken in uncertainty strengthens confidence, not because the future becomes predictable, but because you begin to trust your ability to respond to whatever arises. This trust gradually shifts your focus away from controlling the entire future and toward engaging fully with the present moment. When attention returns to what can actually be done now, uncertainty loses much of its intimidating power. Instead of attempting to solve every possible scenario, you focus on the next meaningful action. That single step often reveals the direction of the next one. Over time, embracing uncertainty leads to a broader perspective on life itself. You begin to notice that many of the experiences that once felt unpredictable eventually contributed to growth in ways you could not have anticipated. Challenges develop resilience. Unexpected encounters lead to new relationships. Changes in direction open paths that were previously hidden. What once appeared as instability gradually reveals itself as movement. Life continues to unfold through moments that cannot be fully predicted, but your relationship with those moments becomes calmer. Uncertainty remains present, yet it no longer carries the same weight of fear. It becomes part of the rhythm of living, an ever-present reminder that the future is not a fixed destination, but an unfolding landscape. And within that landscape, each step forward becomes both a discovery and a continuation of the journey. For many people, the word success carries an invisible weight. It often arrives wrapped in expectations about achievement, recognition, and personal worth. From an early age, individuals are taught to pursue certain milestones: career advancement, financial stability, personal accomplishments, believing that once these goals are reached, fulfillment will naturally follow. Yet the journey toward success frequently becomes a source of stress rather than satisfaction. The reason is not the pursuit itself, but the mindset with which it is approached. When success is tied too tightly to identity, every effort begins to feel like a test. Each opportunity becomes a moment where personal value seems to be measured. If progress is quick, confidence rises. If obstacles appear, doubt quietly follows. In this environment, motivation often becomes entangled with fear: the fear of failing, the fear of falling behind, the fear of not meeting expectations. Instead of moving toward success with clarity and enthusiasm, the mind begins to carry the pressure of proving something. This is where detachment introduces a different way of approaching achievement. Detachment does not mean abandoning ambition or losing interest in your goals. Rather, it changes the emotional relationship you have with the outcomes of your efforts. Instead of binding your sense of worth to whether a particular result occurs exactly as planned, you learn to engage fully in the process itself. When you pursue success with attachment, every setback feels personal. A rejected proposal becomes a reflection of inadequacy. A delayed opportunity feels like evidence that progress is slipping away. The mind becomes preoccupied with the possibility of failure, and this anxiety can gradually drain the enthusiasm that once fueled the pursuit. Detachment loosens this pressure. When you remain committed to your goals but release the emotional demand that success must appear in one specific form, your efforts become lighter and more focused. You still take action, prepare carefully, and work with dedication. The difference lies in how you interpret the results. Success becomes a direction you move toward rather than a verdict that determines your value. A positive mindset strengthens this approach. Positive thinking is often misunderstood as simply ignoring difficulties or pretending that challenges do not exist. In reality, a constructive mindset is rooted in perspective. It recognizes obstacles while also acknowledging the possibilities that remain available within them. Instead of allowing setbacks to define the entire situation, the mind asks what can be learned, adjusted, or improved. One of the most powerful tools for cultivating this mindset is the practice of affirming constructive beliefs about yourself and your potential. The mind tends to repeat the thoughts it encounters most frequently. If those thoughts revolve around limitation, this will never work. I am not capable. Others are better suited for this. They gradually shape perception and behavior. Over time, the mind begins to treat these beliefs as unquestioned truths. Positive affirmations interrupt that pattern. By intentionally reinforcing thoughts that support growth and possibility, you begin to reshape the internal dialogue guiding your actions. Statements of confidence, gratitude, and self-belief gradually shift attention away from doubt and toward opportunity. This shift does not create success instantly, but it creates a mental environment where persistence and creativity can thrive. Gratitude also plays an important role in maintaining a balanced pursuit of success. When the mind focuses exclusively on what has not yet been achieved, it begins to overlook the progress already made. Gratitude restores perspective by recognizing the resources, relationships, and experiences that already exist in your life. This recognition generates a sense of abundance rather than scarcity, which in turn encourages motivation rather than discouragement. Another valuable practice in the pursuit of success is visualization. Visualization involves imagining the outcomes you hope to achieve as if they were already unfolding. When practiced consistently, it strengthens motivation and clarifies intention. The mind begins to align its actions with the possibilities it repeatedly envisions. However, when combined with detachment, visualization remains flexible. You hold the vision clearly while allowing the exact path toward it to evolve naturally. Taking risks is another inevitable part of any meaningful pursuit. Remaining within familiar boundaries may feel safe, but growth rarely occurs there. Opportunities often appear at the edge of what feels comfortable. Detachment helps here as well. When you are not overly attached to avoiding failure, the willingness to explore new possibilities increases. Risks become calculated experiments rather than threatening gambles. Yet success is rarely defined by external achievement alone. A life filled with accomplishments can still feel incomplete if balance and well-being are neglected. Detachment reminds you that fulfillment arises not only from reaching goals, but also from maintaining harmony between different areas of life. Personal health, relationships, creativity, and reflection all contribute to a sense of wholeness that cannot be replaced by achievement alone. When you approach success with this broader perspective, the journey becomes more sustainable. Instead of constantly chasing the next milestone with restless urgency, you begin to appreciate the growth that occurs along the way. Each challenge strengthens resilience. Each effort expands experience. Each outcome, successful or not, adds depth to your understanding. Over time, the pursuit of success becomes less about proving yourself and more about expressing your potential. Actions arise from genuine interest and commitment rather than from pressure or comparison. You continue striving toward meaningful goals, but the emotional intensity surrounding them softens. Success remains important, yet it no longer defines the entire landscape of your life. And within that quieter balance between effort and detachment, progress often unfolds in ways that feel both purposeful and unexpectedly natural. At certain moments in life, a quiet question appears beneath the surface of daily effort. It is not a question about productivity or achievement, but something deeper. What does fulfillment actually mean? For many people, the pursuit of success begins with clear images: financial security, recognition, personal accomplishment, or the satisfaction of reaching goals that once seemed distant. These visions can provide powerful motivation, They push individuals to work harder, to learn more, and to move beyond limitations that once felt permanent. Yet as time passes, something interesting often happens, even when progress is made. Fulfillment does not always arrive in the form that was expected. Part of this experience comes from the way people approach risk. Growth rarely occurs without stepping beyond familiar territory. Every meaningful ambition requires moments when certainty is replaced by possibility. A new idea must be explored without knowing whether it will succeed. A new direction must be chosen before the full path becomes visible. These moments create a natural tension because the mind prefers stability. It prefers to know the outcome before taking the step. But risk is not simply a hazard placed along the path of progress. In many ways, it is the doorway through which development becomes possible. Remaining entirely within familiar boundaries may protect you from certain forms of failure, but it also limits the expansion of your abilities. The willingness to take thoughtful risks, those grounded in preparation, awareness, and intention, allows you to discover capacities that would otherwise remain hidden. The challenge lies in how risk is perceived. When the mind equates risk with danger alone, hesitation becomes constant. Opportunities appear but are quickly dismissed because they do not guarantee success. The imagination begins to focus on everything that could go wrong. Fear narrows perception until even manageable uncertainty feels overwhelming. Over time, this cautious mindset can quietly reduce the number of possibilities you are willing to explore. Visualization offers a powerful counterbalance to this pattern. The mind is deeply influenced by the images it repeatedly holds. When you consistently imagine positive outcomes, completing a project, developing a skill, building something meaningful, you begin strengthening the internal pathways that support those actions. Visualization does not replace effort or preparation, but it enhances them by aligning thought, motivation, and behavior toward the same direction. Athletes, creators, and innovators have long recognized this effect. Before stepping onto the field, the stage, or into the workshop, they often rehearse the outcome in their minds. They imagine movements, strategies, and successful results. This mental rehearsal prepares the brain to recognize opportunities and respond with confidence when the real moment arrives. In everyday life, visualization works in a similar way. When you hold a clear vision of what you hope to create, your attention begins noticing possibilities that support that vision. Yet visualization becomes far more effective when it is paired with detachment. If the imagined outcome becomes rigid, if the mind insists that success must appear in only one specific form, the same tension discussed earlier begins to return. Visualization then turns into pressure rather than inspiration. The goal remains clear, but the mind remains open to different paths through which it may unfold. As people explore risk and visualization together, they often discover that fulfillment itself begins to evolve. Early in life, fulfillment is frequently associated with visible accomplishments. Achieving recognition, reaching financial goals, or completing major projects can feel like definitive proof that one's efforts were worthwhile. These milestones certainly carry value. They represent dedication, persistence, and growth. But over time, many individuals begin to realize that fulfillment cannot depend entirely on external markers. Even impressive achievements can feel incomplete if they are pursued without balance. When success becomes defined solely by comparison or accumulation, the mind may constantly move the finish line further away. Each accomplishment leads immediately to the next expectation, creating a cycle where satisfaction is always postponed. Redefining fulfillment requires expanding the definition of success beyond external outcomes. True fulfillment often includes quieter dimensions, personal growth, meaningful relationships, creative expression, and the sense that one's actions contribute something valuable to the world. These aspects may not always receive public recognition, but they often create the deepest sense of purpose. This broader understanding changes the role that risk and visualization play in life. Risk becomes less about proving something to others and more about exploring what genuinely matters to you. Visualization becomes less about constructing a perfect image of success and more about aligning your actions with your values. When these elements come together, the pursuit of achievement becomes more balanced. Balance also requires attention to well-being. Ambition without self-care can gradually lead to exhaustion, long hours of effort, constant pressure, and the pursuit of perfection may produce temporary results, but they often weaken the very clarity and energy required for sustained progress. Fulfillment grows more naturally when ambition is paired with rest, reflection, and the ability to appreciate the present moment. Relationships play an important role here as well. Shared experiences, supportive conversations, and moments of genuine connection often remind people why their efforts matter in the first place. When success becomes integrated with these human connections, it feels less like a solitary race and more like part of a meaningful life. Over time, risk, visualization, and fulfillment begin to align in a new way. The willingness to explore new possibilities remains strong, but it is guided by a clearer understanding of what truly matters. Effort continues. Goals remain important, and visions of the future still inspire action. Yet the pursuit itself becomes more grounded, less driven by pressure, and more supported by purpose. Within this evolving perspective, fulfillment is no longer postponed until every ambition is completed. It begins to appear throughout the journey itself, in the lessons learned, the connections formed, and the quiet satisfaction of moving steadily toward what feels meaningful. Life rarely unfolds in straight lines. Plans shift, opportunities appear in unexpected forms, and progress often moves through cycles of advancement and difficulty rather than smooth, uninterrupted motion. Yet many people carry an unspoken belief that success should follow a flawless path. The idea of perfection quietly enters the mind, suggesting that every step must be precise, every effort must succeed, and every outcome must confirm the vision imagined at the beginning. When reality inevitably diverges from this expectation, frustration begins to grow. Perfectionism often disguises itself as discipline or high standards. On the surface, it appears admirable, the desire to produce excellent work, to avoid mistakes, and to meet ambitious goals. But beneath that ambition lies a subtle tension. Perfectionism does not merely encourage improvement, it quietly demands that nothing falls short. This demand creates pressure that can turn even meaningful pursuits into sources of anxiety. When perfection becomes the standard, mistakes are no longer treated as part of the learning process. Instead, they appear as threats to personal worth. A small error feels magnified, as if it undermines the entire effort. This mindset can lead to hesitation, because the mind begins fearing any action that might produce an imperfect result. Ironically, the pursuit of perfection often slows progress rather than enhancing it. Resilience offers a different approach to growth. Resilience is the capacity to continue moving forward despite obstacles, setbacks, or unexpected outcomes. It does not require that every attempt succeed. Instead, it recognizes that progress emerges through repeated effort and adjustment. Each challenge becomes part of the path rather than a signal that the journey should end. People who cultivate resilience tend to interpret difficulty in a unique way. Instead of asking why something went wrong, they ask what can be learned from the experience. They understand that setbacks often reveal information that success alone cannot provide. A strategy that fails may expose weaknesses in planning. A misunderstanding may reveal gaps in communication. A temporary obstacle may encourage creativity that leads to a better solution. Adaptability strengthens this process even further. The world changes continuously, technologies evolve, circumstances shift, and opportunities appear in forms that were not originally anticipated. Adaptability allows you to respond to these changes with flexibility rather than resistance. Instead of clinging to a rigid plan, you adjust your approach as new information emerges. This flexibility does not mean abandoning goals. It means understanding that the path toward those goals may evolve along the way. Imagine a traveler navigating a landscape filled with rivers, mountains, and changing weather. The destination remains the same, but the route may shift depending on the terrain encountered. Adaptability allows movement to continue even when the original plan no longer fits the environment. Perfectionism, on the other hand, often insists that only one route is acceptable. When that route becomes blocked, the mind may freeze, uncertain how to proceed. This rigidity can lead to frustration or even abandonment of the goal entirely. By contrast, adaptability encourages exploration. If one approach fails, another can be tested. Progress continues through experimentation rather than through rigid adherence to a single method. Letting go of perfectionism also opens the door to creativity. Creativity thrives in environments where experimentation is allowed. When every action must meet flawless standards, the mind becomes cautious and conservative. It begins avoiding unconventional ideas or new approaches because they might produce mistakes. Once the pressure of perfection eases, curiosity returns. You become willing to try unfamiliar methods, explore different perspectives, and refine ideas through practice. Another important aspect of resilience is emotional recovery. Difficult moments can generate disappointment, frustration, or self-doubt. These emotions are natural responses to challenge. Resilience does not require suppressing them entirely. Instead, it involves acknowledging these feelings without allowing them to dictate your long-term direction. You recognize the disappointment, learn from the experience, and gradually regain your focus. Support systems often contribute to resilience as well. Encouragement from mentors, friends, or colleagues can provide perspective during moments of difficulty. Conversations with others may reveal solutions that were not immediately visible or remind you that setbacks are common in any meaningful pursuit. Shared experiences of challenge often strengthen understanding and motivation. Self-reflection also plays a significant role. Taking time to review your actions and decisions allows you to identify patterns that influence your progress. Reflection turns experience into insight. Instead of repeating the same mistakes unconsciously, you begin adjusting your strategies based on what you have learned. This process transforms each attempt, successful or not, into a step toward greater understanding. Over time, resilience and adaptability reshape your relationship with progress itself. Success is no longer measured by how closely reality matches an ideal image of perfection. Instead, it is measured by the ability to continue learning, adjusting, and moving forward. Each effort becomes valuable because it contributes to growth, even when the outcome differs from what was originally expected. This shift also reduces the emotional weight surrounding achievement. When perfectionism dominates the mind, every outcome feels like a verdict. Either the result proves success or it confirms failure. With resilience and adaptability, outcomes become part of an ongoing process. They provide feedback rather than final judgments. Gradually, the pursuit of goals becomes lighter and more sustainable. You continue striving for improvement, but you do so with patience rather than pressure. Mistakes lose their power to discourage progress. Adjustments become natural rather than threatening. The journey evolves through cycles of effort, reflection, and renewed action. And somewhere within that evolving process, perfection quietly fades from its position of authority, leaving behind a steadier rhythm of growth shaped by resilience and adaptability. There is a quiet boundary that surrounds every human life. It is not drawn on maps, and it does not appear in any visible structure. Yet it shapes countless decisions every day. This boundary is often called the comfort zone. Inside it, life feels predictable, the routines are familiar, the risks are limited, and the mind understands what to expect from the environment. Within this space, you know how to act, how to respond, and how to navigate most situations with relative ease. Comfort, in this sense, provides stability. But stability has an interesting side effect. The longer you remain inside the familiar, the smaller the world can begin to feel. The comfort zone protects you from uncertainty, yet it also quietly restricts exploration. When actions remain confined to what is already known, new abilities rarely develop. Skills remain where they are. Ideas circulate within the same patterns. Over time, even the desire for growth may soften because the mind becomes accustomed to the safety of repetition. Life continues, but the sense of expansion gradually fades into routine. Growth begins at the edge of this boundary. Stepping beyond the comfort zone does not require dramatic leaps or reckless decisions. Often it begins with small, deliberate movements into unfamiliar territory. Trying a new skill, speaking in a situation that once felt intimidating, exploring an unfamiliar field of knowledge, or pursuing an idea that previously seemed uncertain. All of these moments represent subtle expansions of experience. Each step introduces the mind to something it has not yet mastered. Naturally, these moments often bring discomfort. The mind interprets unfamiliar situations as potential threats because it has not yet learned how to navigate them. Doubt appears, questioning whether the effort will succeed. Self-consciousness may arise, reminding you that mistakes are possible. These reactions are not signs that you should retreat. They are signals that the boundary of the comfort zone has been reached. In many ways, discomfort is simply the feeling of growth in progress. When individuals learn to interpret discomfort in this way, their relationship with challenge begins to change. Instead of avoiding unfamiliar situations, they begin to approach them with curiosity. The question shifts from, "What if I fail?" to "What might I learn from this experience?" That shift alone can transform hesitation into exploration. Continuous growth requires this mindset of exploration. The world is constantly evolving, and the knowledge or skills that once seemed sufficient may eventually become outdated. Remaining open to learning allows you to adapt to new circumstances and discover opportunities that would otherwise remain invisible. Learning does not end with formal education. It continues throughout life in countless forms. Sometimes learning appears through structured study reading, training, or guided instruction. At other times it emerges through direct experience. A conversation with someone from a different background can reveal new perspectives. A challenge in work or personal life can introduce skills that were never consciously pursued. Even moments of failure can become powerful lessons when examined with openness rather than self-criticism. A growth-oriented mindset encourages this constant expansion. Instead of seeing ability as something fixed, it recognizes that skills and understanding can evolve through effort and practice. Each new challenge becomes an opportunity to stretch the boundaries of what feels possible. Progress may not occur instantly, but with persistence, the unfamiliar gradually becomes familiar. Continuous growth also broadens perspective. When you repeatedly step beyond what is comfortable, you encounter ideas, cultures, and ways of thinking that differ from your own. These encounters enrich your understanding of the world and reduce the tendency to see situations through narrow assumptions. The mind becomes more flexible, more capable of adapting to different environments and viewpoints. This adaptability strengthens confidence as well. Confidence does not grow from avoiding difficulty, it grows from navigating it. Every time you face something unfamiliar and manage to move through it, even imperfectly, you gather evidence that you are capable of learning and adjusting. Over time, this evidence accumulates, forming a quiet but steady belief in your ability to handle new situations. Another important aspect of growth is the willingness to release outdated beliefs about what you can or cannot do. Many limitations exist only because they were accepted long ago and never questioned again. Perhaps you once decided that a certain skill was beyond your ability, or that a particular path was not meant for you. These assumptions often remain unexamined, quietly shaping choices for years. Stepping outside the comfort zone invites those assumptions to be reconsidered. When you experiment with new experiences, you may discover abilities that had remained hidden simply because they were never tested. Interests may evolve. Passions may appear where none seemed to exist before. The boundaries of identity itself begin to expand. Of course, growth does not require abandoning all forms of stability. The comfort zone still has value. It provides a place of rest where energy can be restored and reflection can occur. The key is balance. Too much comfort leads to stagnation, while constant pressure without rest can lead to exhaustion. Continuous growth emerges when exploration and stability support each other rather than compete. As this rhythm develops, life begins to feel less confined by invisible boundaries. Experiences that once seemed intimidating gradually become part of everyday capability. Skills expand, perspectives deepen, and opportunities multiply in unexpected ways. The world itself begins to appear larger, not because it changed, but because your willingness to engage with it evolved. And somewhere along that gradual expansion, the comfort zone remains behind you, not as a cage, but as a starting point from which new possibilities continue to unfold. At some point in life, a quiet question begins to surface in the mind. It does not usually appear during moments of distraction or busy activity. Instead, it often emerges in the spaces between things during a long walk, a silent evening, or a pause after finishing something that once felt important. The question is simple but profound. What is all of this truly for? Beneath goals, responsibilities, routines, and ambitions lies a deeper curiosity about meaning. People often describe this curiosity as the search for purpose. Purpose is not always easy to define. It is not simply a job title, a financial milestone, or a role assigned by society. Many individuals achieve impressive accomplishments and still feel a quiet emptiness if their actions do not align with something that feels personally meaningful. Purpose tends to exist at a deeper level, connected to values, passion, and the sense that one's actions contribute to something larger than immediate results. Discovering purpose rarely happens through sudden revelation. More often it unfolds gradually through reflection. Reflection allows you to step back from the constant motion of daily life and observe your experiences with greater clarity. Instead of reacting to every demand placed upon your time and energy, you begin examining the direction in which those efforts are guiding you. Self-reflection begins with simple questions. What activities bring a sense of energy rather than exhaustion? What problems naturally attract your attention because you feel compelled to help solve them? What values consistently influence the decisions you make, even when they require sacrifice? These questions do not produce instant answers, but they gradually reveal patterns that might otherwise remain unnoticed. Many people spend years moving according to expectations inherited from family, culture, or social pressure. These influences can provide structure and guidance, yet they can also create distance between what you do and what you genuinely care about. Reflection creates space to examine whether your current direction truly reflects your own priorities or whether it primarily fulfills the expectations of others. This examination requires honesty. Sometimes the path you have been following no longer aligns with who you are becoming. Recognizing this misalignment can feel unsettling because it invites change, yet it also opens the possibility of realigning your actions with your deeper values. When life begins to move in harmony with those values, a sense of purpose naturally strengthens. Inner alignment is the condition that emerges when actions, beliefs, and intentions begin to move in the same direction. Without alignment, life can feel fragmented. You may work toward goals that do not truly inspire you, maintain commitments that drain your energy, or pursue achievements that fail to bring lasting satisfaction. With alignment, however, effort begins to feel more coherent. The energy you invest in your actions reflects what you genuinely believe matters. Achieving this alignment often involves letting go of certain assumptions. For example, many people believe that purpose must be dramatic or extraordinary. They imagine it as a single grand mission that defines their entire life. In reality, purpose frequently appears in quieter forms. It may involve helping others develop their abilities, creating something meaningful through art or innovation, supporting a community, or contributing insight that improves the lives of those around you. Purpose is less about scale and more about authenticity. It grows stronger when your actions reflect what you genuinely care about, rather than what appears impressive from the outside. Reflection also reveals how past experiences shape your sense of meaning. Challenges you have faced may deepen your empathy for others who encounter similar struggles. Skills developed over time may naturally point toward areas where you can offer value. Even difficulties that once felt discouraging can later become sources of understanding that guide your contributions. Journaling can be a useful tool in this process. Writing down thoughts, questions, and observations allows patterns to become visible over time. When experiences are recorded and revisited, you may notice recurring themes in what inspires you, what frustrates you, and what brings a sense of fulfillment. These patterns often reveal clues about where your deeper motivations lie. Quiet practices such as meditation or contemplative walks can also support reflection. When the constant noise of external demands softens, the mind becomes more receptive to subtle insights. Ideas that once seemed distant may gradually take clearer form. The purpose that felt vague begins to appear through repeated moments of awareness. Another important element of discovering purpose is patience. Purpose is not always something that can be forced into immediate clarity. It evolves alongside personal growth. As your understanding of yourself expands, the ways in which you express your purpose may evolve as well. A path that once felt meaningful may later transform into a new direction that reflects a deeper level of insight. This evolving nature of purpose is not a sign of confusion. It is evidence that life itself is dynamic. Just as individuals grow and adapt, their contributions to the world can shift accordingly. What remains constant is the alignment between inner values and outward actions. When this alignment strengthens, motivation often becomes more natural. Effort no longer depends solely on discipline or external reward. Instead, it arises from the sense that what you are doing genuinely matters. Even difficult tasks feel more meaningful because they contribute to something you value deeply. Over time, purpose begins to influence not only what you do, but how you approach life itself. Decisions become clearer because they can be evaluated according to whether they support or distract from your deeper intentions. Energy becomes more focused because it is directed toward activities that resonate with your values. The search for purpose is not a destination that must be reached once and permanently. It is an ongoing dialogue between your inner awareness and the world around you. Through reflection, alignment, and patient observation, that dialogue gradually reveals a direction that feels both authentic and meaningful. Much of what shapes a person's life does not happen in the outer world, but within the quiet conversations taking place inside the mind. Long before actions appear, thoughts begin forming interpretations, judgments, and expectations. These internal dialogues often operate automatically, repeating patterns that have developed over years of experience. Sometimes these patterns support growth and confidence. At other times they quietly reinforce doubt, criticism, and limitation. The quality of this inner conversation plays a powerful role in shaping how life is experienced. Many people carry a constant stream of negative self-talk without fully noticing it. The mind might whisper subtle criticisms throughout the day. You should have done better. You are not ready for this. Others are more capable than you. These thoughts may appear small and fleeting, but when repeated often enough, they begin to influence perception. Over time, they form a lens through which experiences are interpreted. Opportunities appear more intimidating. Mistakes feel heavier than they truly are. Confidence begins to depend on external validation rather than internal stability. Releasing negative self-talk begins with awareness. The first step is not to silence the mind completely, but to observe it. When a critical thought appears, pause long enough to notice it rather than automatically believing it. Ask yourself whether the thought reflects objective reality or whether it is simply a habit formed from past experiences. This simple act of observation creates distance between you and the thought itself. Once that distance exists, the thought loses some of its authority. Replacing negative patterns with healthier ones often requires deliberate practice. One of the most effective practices is gratitude. Gratitude shifts attention away from what appears to be missing and toward what already exists. The mind naturally tends to focus on problems, risks, and unfinished tasks because it is designed to identify potential threats. While this ability is useful for survival, it can also create a constant sense of insufficiency if left unbalanced. Practicing gratitude introduces a counterweight to this tendency. When you regularly acknowledge positive aspects of your life, supportive relationships, opportunities to learn, moments of peace, or even small daily comforts, the mind begins to recognize that life contains more than difficulties alone. Gratitude does not deny challenges, but it places them within a broader context where appreciation and possibility also exist. Over time, this perspective can gradually soften the harsh tone of internal criticism. Meditation provides another powerful method for transforming the inner dialogue. Meditation does not require complex rituals or extended hours of practice. At its core, it simply involves creating a moment of stillness where the mind can observe itself. Sitting quietly and focusing on the breath for even a few minutes can reveal how active the mind usually is. Thoughts appear one after another, often unrelated to the present moment. The purpose of meditation is not to eliminate thoughts entirely, but to change how you relate to them. Instead of chasing each thought or reacting immediately, you allow it to arise and pass without attachment. This practice gradually trains the mind to remain calm, even when thoughts attempt to pull it in different directions. Over time, meditation strengthens the ability to remain present rather than becoming entangled in endless internal commentary. Journaling complements this process by giving thoughts a place to be expressed clearly. Writing down your experiences, concerns, and reflections allows the mind to organize ideas that might otherwise remain tangled in memory. When thoughts are placed on paper, they become easier to examine objectively. Patterns that were previously hidden within mental noise often become visible through written reflection. For example, journaling may reveal recurring fears that influence decision-making or repeated assumptions about personal ability. Once these patterns are recognized, they can be questioned and adjusted. Writing also provides emotional release. Feelings that might remain bottled inside can be expressed honestly, reducing their intensity and allowing greater clarity to emerge. These practices, gratitude, meditation, and journaling, work together to create a healthier relationship with your thoughts. Gratitude redirects attention toward appreciation. Meditation develops calm awareness. Journaling clarifies and organizes internal experiences. Together, they gradually reshape the tone of the mind's inner conversation. Another important step in releasing negative self-talk involves cultivating self-compassion. Many individuals hold themselves to standards of perfection that they would never impose on others. When mistakes occur, they respond with harsh criticism rather than understanding. Yet growth rarely emerges from relentless self-judgment. It develops more effectively when individuals acknowledge their efforts and treat themselves with the same patience they would offer a friend. Self-compassion does not mean ignoring areas that require improvement. It means recognizing that mistakes are part of the learning process rather than proof of inadequacy. When the mind approaches challenges with understanding instead of condemnation, motivation becomes healthier and more sustainable. As these practices continue, the internal atmosphere of the mind gradually changes. Negative self-talk loses its dominance because it is no longer the only voice being heard. Gratitude introduces appreciation. Meditation introduces calm awareness. Journaling introduces clarity and reflection. The inner conversation becomes more balanced, allowing constructive thoughts to guide action more often than critical ones. Over time, this shift influences not only how you think, but also how you experience the world around you. Situations that once triggered immediate self-doubt begin to feel more manageable. Opportunities that once seemed intimidating become invitations to learn rather than threats to confidence. The mind becomes a quieter, more supportive environment for growth. Within that quieter environment, thoughts still appear and disappear as they always have. Yet they no longer dominate the entire landscape of awareness, leaving space for a steadier sense of understanding to remain. Desire is one of the most powerful forces guiding human life. Every ambition, every creative effort, every journey toward improvement begins with a simple internal movement, the recognition that something meaningful could exist beyond the present moment. Desire is the spark that encourages exploration, progress, and transformation. Yet many people struggle with their desires not because they lack them, but because they attempt to control the exact path through which those desires must appear. The mind often treats desire like a fragile plan that must be protected from uncertainty. Once a goal forms, the mind begins constructing a detailed vision of how it should unfold. The timing must be precise, the outcome must match expectations, and the steps must follow a specific sequence. When life inevitably moves in a different direction, frustration arises, doubt follows, and sometimes the original desire begins to feel distant or impossible. The law of detachment offers a different perspective. Instead of forcing desires to unfold according to rigid expectations, it invites you to hold them with openness and trust. Desire itself is not the problem. In fact, desire can be a valuable guide that reveals what matters most to you. The challenge arises when desire becomes entangled with attachment to a single outcome. When that attachment loosens, desire can move more freely through your life. Trust becomes the foundation for this shift. Trust does not require blind optimism or the belief that everything will unfold perfectly. Rather, it involves recognizing that life often brings opportunities and solutions in forms that cannot be predicted in advance. When you trust the unfolding process, you allow space for possibilities that the mind may not have initially imagined. Consider how often meaningful experiences arrive unexpectedly. A conversation leads to an opportunity that was never planned. A challenge reveals abilities that had remained hidden. A change in direction introduces people or ideas that reshape your path. These moments rarely appear because they were precisely predicted. They emerge because life remains dynamic and responsive to countless influences beyond immediate awareness. Trust allows you to remain open to these possibilities. Instead of constantly measuring whether your desires are progressing exactly according to plan, you focus on maintaining clarity about what you value while allowing the details to evolve naturally. This approach reduces the pressure surrounding every step. Effort continues, but the emotional strain attached to controlling outcomes begins to soften. Forgiveness plays an equally important role in allowing desire to flow. Many people carry emotional burdens from past experiences, moments of disappointment, mistakes, or situations where expectations were not fulfilled. These memories can quietly shape the way future possibilities are perceived. If the past remains filled with unresolved resentment or regret, it becomes difficult to approach new desires with openness. Forgiveness does not mean denying that painful experiences occurred. It means releasing the emotional grip those experiences continue to hold. When you forgive others, you free yourself from carrying the weight of resentment. When you forgive yourself, you acknowledge that growth often emerges through imperfect attempts. In both cases, forgiveness restores emotional energy that can then be directed toward new possibilities. Without forgiveness, desire becomes entangled with fear. The mind may hesitate to pursue meaningful goals because it remembers past disappointment. Old experiences create a protective barrier, suggesting that it might be safer not to try again. Forgiveness dissolves that barrier gradually. By releasing the emotional charge attached to the past, you create space for new intentions to develop without the constant shadow of previous outcomes. Inner peace strengthens this process even further. When the mind is restless or overwhelmed, desires often become distorted. Instead of representing genuine aspirations, they may become attempts to escape discomfort or prove personal worth. In such states, achieving the desired outcome rarely produces lasting satisfaction because the deeper tension remains unresolved. Inner peace allows desires to emerge from a clearer place within you. When the mind is calm, intentions become more aligned with authentic values rather than with external pressures or temporary emotions. Decisions are made with greater clarity, and actions follow with steadier confidence. Even when progress unfolds slowly, the internal experience remains balanced. Practices such as mindfulness, reflection, and gratitude help cultivate this inner peace. They remind you that fulfillment does not exist only in the future but can also be experienced in the present moment. When peace becomes part of daily awareness, desire no longer carries the burden of solving every aspect of life. It becomes simply one expression of your ongoing growth. Letting desire flow also means recognizing that timing often plays a role in how opportunities unfold. Not every goal manifests immediately, and not every path becomes visible all at once. Sometimes a period of preparation is necessary before the next step can appear clearly. During these moments, patience becomes an essential companion to trust. Patience does not mean inactivity. It means continuing to move forward with purpose while allowing events to develop at their natural pace. Just as seeds require time before growth becomes visible above the soil, many aspirations develop quietly beneath the surface before their results can be seen. When trust, forgiveness, and inner peace come together, desire begins to feel less like a force that must be controlled and more like a current that moves naturally through life. You continue setting intentions, taking action, and exploring possibilities. Yet the tension surrounding those efforts gradually fades. Within that quieter relationship with desire, the future remains open, shaped by both your actions and the unfolding rhythm of life itself. There comes a stage in every inner journey when the search for external answers begins to fade. and attention gradually turns inward. Earlier in life, many people believe that fulfillment depends primarily on circumstances, achievements, recognition, security, or the approval of others. These goals may provide temporary satisfaction, yet over time a deeper realization often begins to emerge. The most meaningful transformation does not arise from controlling the world around us, but from understanding the forces that shape the world within us. Self-mastery begins with this realization. It is not about dominating life or achieving perfect control over every situation. Instead, it involves developing awareness and responsibility for the thoughts, emotions, and actions that guide daily experience. When individuals learn to observe their internal patterns with clarity, they begin to see how much of their life is influenced by habits formed long ago. These habits often operate automatically, shaping reactions before conscious reflection has a chance to intervene. For example, when unexpected difficulties appear, the mind may instinctively respond with frustration, anxiety, or resistance. These reactions feel natural because they have been repeated many times. Yet self-mastery introduces a new possibility, the ability to pause before reacting. In that pause, awareness creates a small but powerful space between stimulus and response. Within that space lies freedom, the freedom to choose a more thoughtful and balanced reaction rather than following an automatic pattern. This simple shift represents one of the most important foundations of self-mastery. Instead of being carried along by emotional impulses or external pressures, individuals gradually become more conscious participants in their own lives. Decisions become intentional rather than reactive. Emotions are acknowledged without being allowed to dominate every situation. Developing this level of awareness requires patience and practice. Many traditions emphasize meditation as a powerful tool for cultivating such awareness. During meditation, the mind learns to observe its own activity. Thoughts appear, emotions arise, and sensations pass through awareness like clouds moving across the sky. By simply watching these processes unfold without immediate judgment, individuals begin to understand that they are not identical to every thought or feeling that arises within them. This insight may seem subtle, but its implications are profound. When people realize that thoughts are temporary events rather than absolute truths, they gain the ability to respond to them with greater freedom. Fear, doubt, and worry may still appear, but they no longer possess the same authority. They become signals to observe rather than commands that must be obeyed. Spiritual insight grows naturally from this expanding awareness. Across many philosophical and spiritual traditions, the path toward wisdom begins with understanding the nature of the mind itself. In Christianity, spiritual growth is often described as aligning one's life with deeper moral and spiritual principles through faith and reflection. In Buddhism, the path toward liberation involves recognizing the impermanent nature of thoughts, emotions, and circumstances. Through mindful awareness and meditation, practitioners gradually release attachments that create suffering. Although these traditions express their teachings in different ways, they share a common insight. Suffering often arises not from events themselves, but from the way the mind clings to them. When individuals become deeply attached to specific outcomes, identities, or expectations, life's inevitable changes can feel threatening. Detachment offers a different approach. It encourages individuals to engage fully with life while recognizing that no external condition can permanently define inner peace. Self-mastery, therefore, involves learning to relate to life with both commitment and flexibility. Goals may still exist, ambitions may still inspire action, and relationships may still carry deep meaning. Yet beneath all these pursuits remains an understanding that identity and peace do not depend entirely on external circumstances. This awareness provides a form of stability that remains steady even when life becomes unpredictable. Character plays a crucial role in sustaining this stability. Qualities such as integrity, honesty, compassion, and resilience strengthen the foundation of self-mastery. When actions consistently align with personal values, the mind experiences less internal conflict. Decisions become clearer because they reflect principles that remain stable across changing situations. Integrity, in particular, creates a powerful sense of inner coherence. When individuals act in ways that reflect their deepest values, even when doing so requires courage, they develop confidence not from external praise but from internal consistency. This form of confidence tends to be quieter and more enduring than confidence based solely on achievements or recognition. Compassion also contributes to the maturity of self-mastery. As awareness expands, individuals often recognize that others are navigating similar struggles, uncertainty, fear, aspiration, and growth. This realization softens judgment and encourages empathy. Instead of viewing life as a constant competition for validation or success, relationships become opportunities for understanding and mutual development. At this stage of reflection, the wisdom of detachment becomes clearer. Detachment does not mean withdrawing from life or refusing to care about outcomes. It means participating fully in life, while remaining aware that control over every detail is neither possible nor necessary. When this understanding settles into daily awareness, the mind becomes less burdened by constant striving. Energy that was once spent on resisting change or forcing outcomes becomes available for creativity, learning, and genuine connection. Individuals continue to pursue meaningful goals, yet their sense of identity no longer rises or falls entirely with each result. Success can be appreciated without becoming a source of attachment. Difficulties can be faced without becoming a source of despair. Through self-mastery, spiritual insight, and detachment, life gradually reveals a different rhythm. Instead of constant tension between expectation and reality, experience begins to unfold with greater balance. The mind remains attentive and engaged, yet it is no longer consumed by the need to control every moment. Within that balance, understanding continues to deepen quietly over time.